And I will note, as I did with FEC, that we have received an additional comment that came through Friday afternoon, Monday morning. It was sent to the county counsel's office and through another county agency, state's attorney's office. It was not sent directly to our attention. So our partner agencies were kind enough to forward it to us, but we did not receive it before we submitted all of the materials to you for this meeting. So we've attached it, and I'm frankly not certain whether it has been circulated to the full board, as all comments have been prior to the meeting, but it is in process to ensure that each member of the board receives this final comment. And I mention that at this time because there was information in this comment that was specific to a student in a school, and that has been redacted, but a full version, non-redacted copy is in the process of being provided to each member of the board. So I just wanted to be sure that you were aware of that. We received comments. The comments that we received were largely related to the protocols, in that they were either speaking to the protocol specifically that were posted online, or referencing in the comments specific to the policy that the policy should be more specific in certain areas, many of which are in fact reflected in the protocol. In considering all of the comments that we've received from the public, a few edits have been made, suggestions from staff for edits have been made, and I will summarize those suggested edits and show you where they're highlighted in the policy, and then we have staff here and myself, of course, to take questions that you have. So the edits that are being proposed by staff address collaborating with partner agencies to ensure alleged perpetrator does not present an immediate danger to the safety of an alleged victim and other students. A clarification of MCPS's ability to interview alleged victims, alleged perpetrators, or witnesses while our external agencies are conducting investigations, how that will be handled in collaboration.
Can you elaborate on that? I'm sorry.
Sure. So the language is more specific on page 5 of the policy. Highlighted, started at line 137. It says, while any investigation by external agencies are pending, MCPS may not interview witnesses, alleged victims, or alleged perpetrators without prior agreement from and subject to any limitations recommended by the investigating agency.
So on this change was prompted by some comments and some further discussion about the way in which, under our reporting obligations, CPS and or the police take the lead in investigating alleged child abuse or neglect, or abuse or neglect of vulnerable adults. In addition, there may be situations where we want to take a employment action against a staff in a small subset of cases where it's alleged that a staff member has engaged in some inappropriate child abuse or
such as
neglect.
removing them from being alone with children.
Or up to including termination or suspension. And so for a number of reasons, including that we don't want to do anything that may jeopardize the investigation, but we also, I think that as research has developed, best practices really are to avoid multiple interviews of child, or really any victim of such a sensitive issue as abuse or neglect. And so being sensitive to the need to or the desire to reduce the number of interviews to the extent to which we can depend in our investigations, subsequent investigations, on what our partner agencies have uncovered, that helps reduce that potentially traumatizing issue. So I think we had generally made the broad statement that we wouldn't do anything to jeopardize the investigation, but we wanted to be clearer here that interviews in the investigatory context of a alleged perpetrator, an alleged victim, or witnesses shouldn't be happening while another investigation is pending by an external agency unless we've talked and worked it out with them and made it very clear that we're doing it in a way that's aligned. And I think that it strikes a broader theme here, which is that we're trying to work really well together with our partner agencies, all in the interest of children's safety.
Which I appreciate and think is really important. I also just think it's important that we're making sure people understand that that's not precluding us from being able to take action even while there's an ongoing investigation if we feel that it's in the best interest of our students.
And there have been tweaks to clarify in the protocols that while an investigation is pending, we may feel it's necessary to place somebody on administrative leave, if, and again in the small subset that involve staff, or remove them from, even in the immediate moments after, remove them from interaction with children. I think that the sensitivity that we are stressing is that we don't want to do anything that inadvertently might affect an investigation. So working with the police and with CPS to take those steps in a way that doesn't unnecessarily tip somebody off that there's an investigation going on will ultimately be in the best interest of children, because it may reduce the ability of someone to continue to offend if that's the case.
So just explain to me how the process will occur. We've deleted the language that talks about an action plan to protect the victim, to be implemented in consultation with the MCPS and county partner agencies. We've deleted the language about the action plan, but we've added language that says collaboration with the appropriate county partner agencies to ensure that the alleged offender does not present an immediate danger.
And that's really because action plan caused some confusion, going back to the lingo that's not that we use as MCPS, but that CPS uses, and so we didn't want to make it seem like we were doing something that CPS is supposed to do, which is to develop an action plan for the safety of the victim. But the idea here that we wanted to and thought it was important to reference was that that the immediate danger to students, if it's again one of those small cases that we're focusing on here of a staff member, that it's important to the safety of those students that if there's a real and present danger, that we're removing that person from contact with kids. And so that is in that.
Do we remove only after collaboration?
Well, so the reporter is reporting to CPS or the police, and so as part of those initial steps, working with the system-wide child abuse contact and the principal, making that evaluation quickly of what should be the immediate steps, whether it's while the police are working it through, should another administrator come down and keep eyes and assess the situation. But crucially, we want to take swift steps consistent with not affecting an investigation. And we're going to work together and make sure that we have those lines of communication always open in those situations. And I think that's really what we have been doing, where we have had reports in the interim in these months. And many of these situations are ruled out, but it's those important initial time periods where we want to have a clear plan going forward.
And we have precedent over the decision as to whether or not to remove somebody, even if there's an investigation going on that might be negatively affected by the fact that we've tipped someone off, but we're not going to keep someone in place unsupervised.
Right. If you look in the protocols, one of the things that we have stressed, and I think this is on page, somewhere around, pages have shifted, on page 10, we put in a standard here that says that OHRD will place an employee on administrative leave unless there's significant credible information that another course of action is warranted. So that's and it's a broader issue that there will be a plan developed in consultation again with our partner agencies, see the theme, and the system-wide contact to make that plan and do it in a precipitous fashion. And those are situations that we work out, but we work out consistent with keeping our buildings and our students and our community safe.
Okay. Thank you.
third category. The next category of edits that we've made in response to the collective comments that we received is regarding protecting records or reports concerning abuse and the identity of the reporter from unauthorized disclosure. And those changes are reflected on page 7. And the final category of edits are with respect to reports to the board regarding suspected abuse or neglect by MCPS employees, contractors, or volunteers. And those edits are reflected on page 11 as additional reports to the board.
So can you just walk me through the reports that, the language that you're recommending? So under 1, the number of reports by MCPS involving suspected abuse or neglect. What would that report look like? Is that every suspected abuse? Is that every actual report that's been made to Child Protective Service? Is that exactly how much detail would be in those reports? Is when we say MCPS, is that any MCPS employee?
Lots of questions there. So I think that obviously there'll be back and forth about reports, but these are reports made by MCPS reporters that go through. There's a process of sending a report to the System-Wide Child Abuse Contact Department of Student Services, and so aggregate numbers of all of those reports, and including in that a subcategory for reports based on contractors, employees, and volunteers, and then I would imagine that's just that disposition. So to the extent to which we can report, and again we have to remember that we have to be very careful about unauthorized disclosure, and that's why we added in the additional part just to stress that legal requirement against unauthorized disclosure. So if the report is ruled out or indicated, or there was an arrest that resulted, or it was screened out, those would be the final by disposition taken.
So that would be number 2, the ones that are screened out, or
that would be still in number 1. Number 2 would be if there's an arrest or charges filed.
okay.
Again, that would be a situation where there would be public information, so that would be easier to report on. So the balance here obviously is we want to report in useful ways while also respecting confidentiality and making sure that we're not doing anything to either jeopardize a reporter or to unfairly single out a personnel action. So arrest information was number 2, and number 3 was focused on letters that the superintendent is required to send to the state superintendent to revoke a certificate. So when there is a conviction of child abuse, or when there's a resignation while a investigation is happening, that's something that we are required to seek revocation or suspension of a suspension to make that request to the state superintendent, who has the final say. And those are proceedings that the state reviews and ultimately makes a determination on.
So getting back to 1, and I know it says suspected abuse. I mean, potentially we would have cases where somebody noticed something, but didn't necessarily, I'm not, and I guess the question is how those get handled. So
Right.
the teacher's walking by a classroom and she sees a teacher handing out tests and giving the kids to get a good grade a hug. And she says, well, I don't know whether or not that's abuse or looks innocent,
Not appropriate.
but it's not, so, does she go to the principal, and the principal says, well, that's really innocent, that's not really abuse? I mean, how do we know that those things are being handled appropriately? That
And we're not just moving someone around because of that.
well, forgetting
feeling
moving
that
around,
they-
I'm just saying, I mean, how do we know that that Child Protective Services actually, what is abuse, what is just, it looks like it could be, and I know we have language that says you err on the side, if you're not sure, then you make a report and let Child Protective Services investigate. And that's appropriate. I'm just saying, but I mean, so what if the teacher says, well, I saw something, I'm not really sure what it is.
So we've been very clear in our training, and will continue to be clear, that we are urging and requiring our staff to err on the side of reporting. So when in doubt, report is a simple piece. But I think that that's where training comes in, and professional learning around this, so that we are clear also about recognizing and reporting the signs of abuse and neglect. And our code of conduct gives some additional specificity of actions that are appropriate or inappropriate. So, but if somebody has a suspicion of reporting, we don't want to create a culture of going to talk to the principal and seeing whether it is yes or no. We want to err on the side of reporting, having CPS screen it out, and then proceed if it's a case, or take an investigation. I'm not saying in any way there that a hug after a test would be something that would necessarily require reporting, but I think we need to be clear about that and urge and require ultimately that our employees, all of our employees, insist on a culture where we are reporting and allowing the experts at our county partner agencies to help us sort out what is and is not worth further investigation.
Because I guess those are the situations, I guess we talked the last time, and it looks like right now, I mean, where in the past, I think that's where we were collecting this database, I guess called the infamous database, of, where
Exactly.
I'd say that these were innocent things that were being collected in a database, but maybe if you have 20 innocent
Incidents.
then maybe
reported.
at some point it looks like
A duck.
this isn't so innocent anymore. But it looks like we're not planning to keep this database anymore. So,
So we took out of the protocols references to a inappropriate interactions database while we're looking into that with some concerns on that. But I think that what we wanted to focus these protocols and ultimately the policy on was when we have a report to CPS, establishing the clear requirement that OHRD, our Human Resources Department, would open an investigation for every one of those reports, even if it happens to be screened out by CPS and or the police or the state's attorney, because our standards for misconduct in office and the other areas where MCPS as a system has obligations to supervise its employees are a different standard from the police standard and from the CPS standard.
But then that sounds like it's relying on it having made it that far. I think that you along with
talking
me,
about the ones that-
right? The ones that don't get to CPS, the ones that don't go to the police because the principal says, well, that kid could use a hug and whatever, and it's okay. But again, if we don't, are we eliminating? Are you saying that we're eliminating the way of tracking just uncomfortable behavior, or someone who does something that, again, it's not the type of offense that you're necessarily going to call the police on or CPS on, but after a while, if someone just makes you uncomfortable enough times, we want to have a record somehow that, okay, maybe this person doesn't, you could do a background check and there's not going to be any kind of conviction, but that doesn't necessarily mean that there isn't something there that we don't want them necessarily working with the students.
So I think an important factor is the fact that we still expect our leaders and administrators to serve in that capacity, and we still expect all staff to enact that role of being the mandated reporter. So if we play that scenario out where it seems uncomfortable, it appears uncomfortable, and there is a report or an allegation that a touch, a look, a statement made someone feel uncomfortable, we cannot solely rely on our county partner agencies to say we're screening this in for investigation. We still have to do our due diligence in making sure that there's appropriate interactions with staff and students.
So how is that being tracked?
So it still comes in as, we still receive those phone calls and that contact information. So as a staff member, I may speak to my administrator and say, I observed this behavior. That still is warranting a call to the Office of School Support and Improvement. It's still warranting the call to CPS, and CPS may screen it out, or whatever county partner agency. As an administrator, I'm still working with OHRD. I am looking at that staff behavior, and then I still have administrative responsibility to follow up. So every incident still has a level of due diligence associated with it, and my responsibility is to make sure that I follow up on that, regardless of whether CPS or the police department or state attorneys has a different disposition of the scenario.
And I think that, again, to return to the theme that we're trying to create a culture where when in doubt, report, because that one reporter may only see a small piece of a larger picture. So they may, ultimately the legal standard is suspicion of abuse or neglect, but as our county partner agencies have said, sometimes it takes reports from multiple different sources to piece together a story that could have behavior in the school context, outside the school context, and so we want to be in a place where we make sure that our reporters aren't jumping to conclusions and are erring on the side of getting consultation from by the fact of reporting to one of our partner agencies, so that record is there just in case.
But I guess I still feel like my question's not being answered. How are we at MCPS, if a teacher comes to the principal and says, for example, I saw so-and-so go, their door's always closed, and when they're alone with kids, it doesn't make me feel right, or I saw them giving the hug. It doesn't rise to CPS action, it doesn't rise to police action, but the principal says, don't do this, don't do that again, don't do that again. How are we tracking that so that, for example, if come contract renewal time, that principal says, you know what, this teacher hasn't done anything wrong, but I don't feel comfortable. There's just too many whatevers. So I'm not going to, and then they go to another school, and then that principal's having things. How are we tracking reports within MCPS that don't necessarily make it to the level of action to another agency or any kind of disciplinary action other than, just doesn't feel right? How are we tracking that so that someone's not flying under the radar?
We track that the way that we track any memos to the record, other responses to employees as part of school files, and ultimately, when appropriate, up to OHRD files on employees as part of the ordinary investigative and response to concerns or even potential concerns that administrators may have. But I think that, again, I'm going back to, we don't want to have our staff people jumping to a conclusion that something isn't of cause to concern, because we want to make sure that we are appropriately stitching together patterns.
Okay, I guess the language, this is fine in terms of when the system's working. This is, but it's like we don't know what we don't know. And the question is, how do we as a board provide oversight to make sure that the appropriate reports are being filed, and that, what is our level of confidence in terms of the reporting, that we know that people are always, that the suspicions that, the principal's not saying, don't report that.
Right.
That's not really, I know that teacher would never do anything inappropriate. I'll say something to that teacher. How do we know that the system's working? obviously, this will tell us all the stuff that does get reported.
Legally, right.
And even the stuff that gets reported and CPS investigates and determines, okay, there's nothing there, fine. I'm sure most of these, they investigate and they determine there's nothing there. But how do we know that everything is being done appropriately at the local level? But,
So,
what report would tell us that?
So that's a hard question, but I think we've built in important pieces to that. One is annual training, and two is in the investigation by OHRD, when there is a report, one of the things that we did say was that investigation by OHRD is not only to assess whether there's disciplinary action arising from that report to the person who allegedly offended, but also that the reporting protocol was followed in that situation. And if there's learning that needs to be happening from that reporting process, then we can build it into improvements to the process. So, I think that there is a commitment to, in each situation, looking at it and making sure that the protocols are working, the regulations working, the policies working, and training ultimately is impacted by what we learn in those continuous improvement cycles.
I think it's also a case of this is a culture shift, and it's a transitional period. And part of this educating of our staff, of all of our staff, is going to be critical to fostering that culture shift, because at the end of the day, we are dependent upon human behavior and human nature. So I think what I'm hearing you asking is for this assurance that every staff member will always report, and that's what our goal is what we're striving for, but it's definitely a culture shift, and we have to ensure that we're equipping everyone with the information they need through the professional learning. We're creating the rationale and the sense of urgency that this is what we all need to do, and then we have to follow up. What do our reports look like? What are the instances? And we have to equip at all levels of the organization. And I think that's what our goal is with the policy and with the protocols, is to create this shift in culture, that we're promoting that reporting and the reason why, so that it becomes part of the practice.
I can't speak for McCall specifically, but I can say, I'm going to continue to use that hugging example because I feel like it's a very good one. It's an innocent gesture, generally, at least, I hope that it always is, but sometimes it's not. And I don't believe someone should lose their job or go to jail for giving a child a hug, for having done a good job on a test when this is someone who doesn't normally do well on tests, whatever the situation might be. That said, it should be reported, and then it should be written down somewhere, and it should be fine that the principal spoke to him and said, maybe, just be careful, don't do that, or that's not whatever our case might be. But then if there's another one, and another one, and another one, if it's never written down somewhere, if it's never tracked anywhere, if the employee moves to another school somewhere and this principal doesn't know that there have been complaints about chronic hugging or whatever the situation might be, then are we facilitating an environment where someone gets to continue to move on and is subtly touching children, where because we didn't track it, because we had no record of it, because nothing official was done on it, and we're assuming that good training is going to say you shouldn't be doing that, but if there is actually a problem there, they're going to do it anyways.
So I just wanted to clarify that. So I think that we need to be careful here. While we're clear about reporting and recognizing the signs of abuse and neglect, we're also not trying to create a entirely sterile environment. And so I think that, we can talk about, spin out hypotheticals all we want, but if a first grader in the context of that classroom is getting a brief hug of encouragement, are we going to say, and I wasn't sure what you were going to say, is that's inappropriate? I think that's part of the pieces that we want to clarify in a code of conduct and be clear about that. But I think that it's important. While we're clear about reporting and recognizing the signs of abuse and neglect, we're also not trying to create a entirely sterile environment. And so I think that, we can talk about, spin out hypotheticals all we want, but if a first grader in the context of that classroom is getting a brief hug of encouragement, are we going to say, and I wasn't sure what you were going to say, is that's inappropriate? I mean, I think that's
No,
part
not
of
surely.
part of the pieces that we want to clarify in a code of conduct and be clear about that. But I think that it's important to recognize that there are plenty of areas where it depends on the context and the specific, and we're pushing people to report. But also, I think we need to stress to our staff people who are also trying to be and stress social and emotional learning the importance of positive relationships with children.
And, you know, I mean, I know this may sound trite, but as I attended graduation and I saw an awful lot of staff members hugging kids as they came
Yep,
across
myself
the
included.
stage going, you know, I'm so proud of you, great job. I mean, I thought to myself, I don't want to totally create a climate where a staff member can't, you know, at graduation, hug a child, because some of those kids, it took a miracle to get them across the stage. But I think there are situations where you have, you know, as an administrator, as a fellow teacher, staff member in the school, have that creepy feeling about something isn't right. And I think that's the bottom line, that, you know, we need to make sure, you know, when in doubt, report. I mean, that becomes a mantra, and it's not the innocent hug of encouragement, it's the patterns, it's the, you know, I mean,
Right.
some of them, some of the instances we've heard about, you know, there were probably early warning indicators that something wasn't right. But, you know, I think what we're getting at is we have variability among people, and human beings are different. I'm different than Rebecca. How I view things may be different. But, you know, to be able to have a systemic approach to protecting our kids, and for us to know, you know, we see the correspondence that the superintendent has sent when he sends it to the state superintendent revoking someone's teaching license. We see, you know, a warning that there's an impending arrest, and, you know, or someone has been placed on administrative leave. We don't see the gray areas. We don't know. So I think that, you know, what you're hearing from board members is a concern about, you know, that variability, you know, how that's happening, and a systemic way of reporting to us what's going on. So, I mean, I think I'm
thank
trying
you.
to capture what,
Well spoken from on my part for you. Thank you.
And I think the short answer is we're committed to all of that. I mean, I think we're committed to Aranza used the term culture shift, a strong culture shift here to be very clear about reporting expectations, to be relentless and robust in training about that, and then to be critically appraising through reports and through follow-up what's working and where we need to improve, and also not taking our word for it, working with and collaborating, and this is a strong theme throughout with our partner agencies, having national experts involved, welcoming comments from a variety of people, including some of the good comments we received as part of this process, to improve where we need to improve, and to really be candid about where we do need to improve.
And this is a work in progress, a continued work in progress. I know that there's been some concerns about, you know, is it fully ready? Is it fully... I think it's important personally that we start doing something, and I do firmly believe that we need to push through the training over the summer and everything. But we'll continue to reevaluate as we notice things that need to be improved on. Is that correct? We'll get updates routinely and regularly on this, I assume. Sir Chair.
In the superintendent's recommended redesign, building on Ms. Berner and Dr. Zuckerman's comments, there was a commitment to annual review of the policy and regulation to ensure that we remain on top of best practices, to ensure that the processes are working. You know, every policy can be nice, but if it sits up on the shelf
Right.
and doesn't work in process, then we haven't we're not doing the work we need to do.
Could
And
we
so the
maybe
question is, and the importance is that this policy lives, that if there are areas where we need to fix it, we commit to doing that and we commit to moving forward, but also that we get something in place that's strong and sufficient to be training all 22,000 of our employees for the 2015-16 school year.
Is it possible to up that annual review, at least in the beginning, to maybe say 6 months? Or just to give us an update as to how you feel like the things went over the summer, and if there are...
Well, sure, we can schedule a time to have a briefing, or have it as part of a board agenda to have an update on, what was the training like, how did it go, and what's our experience.
appreciate that.
I mean, I have to say, back in the fall, we had people who were saying to us, hurry up, hurry up, hurry up. And now we've got comments, slow it down, but we are going to be having the training before school starts. I mean, that's, the idea is to have, all of our employees trained over the summer.
How about the code of conduct? What's the status of that?
We expect to have that through and have opportunities for engagement by stakeholders and in place to be part of the training for the new year.
So, I mean, there is some urgency to getting this going, and I agree with Rebecca that, we operate in MCPS with the mantra of continuous improvement, and so, it's a starting place, it's an improvement over what is existing. Is it perfect? No. I mean, not necessarily. Is it going to be, evolving over time? Yes. But, I mean, I think we have an obligation. And also, when we take the budget action tomorrow, the background checks, that's a line item that's included. I mean, the expansion is included in the budget recommendation that's before us tomorrow.
And I think that balance is really important. Right. So even while in the months while we've been working on this, there was a question about making sure that our principals, our building leaders, our office leaders, our transportation supervisors knew some of the key points of where we were going. So we balanced, do we have everything in place? We're still working on this, but we decided it was really important to emphasize a couple of key themes. When in doubt, report. Our staff aren't conducting investigations before they report, and a couple other points that we built on that initial training, and we've seen important improvements just from that, and we want to get to the point where we can build that out, not just to principals and office leaders, but to all of our staff who are mandated reporters under the law.
So when this comes back to the board, assuming we approve this now, this will come back to the board at our evening meeting in June. I mean, what will be the status and where are we in terms of the MOUs, the training plans, the code of conduct? I mean, how much will be done at that point, and how much and what will need to be done before the next school year?
I'm glad you asked that question, because I think that Dr. Zuckerman would have prodded us if we didn't say it. So we expect to give a more comprehensive update to the full board at that June 29th meeting on each of the, or collectively, the key priorities of the plan in January, and to check off strong progress on all of those things. Will there be some things that we keep needing to work on? Absolutely. But we hope to be able to present a candid status report on where we are.
I want to go back to, I know we sort of like jumped ahead in terms of the, but going back, in terms of the reports, I mean, I guess we were raising the question of, is there more information we should be getting or can be getting? This language is pretty broad in terms of the reports, so maybe this is just something we could be working out. But I mean, I'm just thinking whether or not, do we collect, or is there any data out there in terms of, even, a parent called and the principal said, on this, my kid got a hug and I'm vicious, but items that don't raise to the level of suspected abuse, or whoever makes a decision that some observed or reported conduct doesn't rise to the level of abuse that gets reported. And it was my understanding is those were the things that we were collecting in that database in the past. Not the things that were reported, but issues that didn't rise to the level of suspected abuse. Are there any statistics on that? Is there any data on that? Is there some sort of a global report we could be getting on those things from individual schools so we could see that, if a principal's saying, well, the parent called, but I didn't think that this was worthy. This is how I disposed of it. Or I counseled, the teacher said, don't ever do that again. It doesn't look good. I mean, is there any data that could be reported to us so we know what are the areas that fall short of abuse, so we know that those are being appropriately handled?
I think within the context of this general language, we can explore, what one thought that came to my mind was, as we roll out the employee code of conduct, if there are employee code of conduct related actions that are not captured in this group, figuring out are those categories. But I want to be careful not to say that there are, or even to give the suggestion that we aren't reporting everything that we should be reporting to our obligated partner agencies.
Right. Well, I think we should look into that. And I guess the other thing is, and I'm still going back to this, like I said, the database. I thought that the point in the past was collecting information on those things. So this staff member has gotten repeated reports of questionable, I won't call it abuse, I'll call it questionable conduct. And the idea was that somebody was going to be looking and saying at some point in time, too many of these things, we have to take a harder look. But if the plan is to no longer collect that in a database, then I guess the question is, how will we know and who would be responsible, especially if with mobility, if they change locations and all that, how would we know that that person is being appropriately investigated? In the absence of collecting some sort of central database on that.
So I think many of those actions ultimately are grooming behaviors, and if they're grooming behaviors, we want to take steps to be proactive about them. And if there are interactions, consultations, memos to the record regarding those, we want to make sure that those are reflected centrally in OHRD investigative files for employees. But we also don't want to send mixed messages that there are some types of something that really should be reported that aren't reported. So I think that that's the balance ultimately, that we want to be clear that we don't have two tracks or anything, and we're encouraging people ultimately to report.
I have a question about, this is on kind of a little bit of a different area, but in terms of where things like, I feel a little bit like some of our terms are vague in the sense of I'm not sure where certain groups necessarily would fall in to them. And I've brought this up in the past, but on page 9 of 12, number 4, developing the process for screening new and existing employees as well as volunteers and outside contractors who have direct, unsupervised, and uncontrolled access. I mean, do we define what uncontrolled means? Do we, you talked about having badges. Has that been fully identified in here, that is going to be the plan, process, the procedure? And then to them, things like, I've brought this up in the past, but on page 9 of 12, number 4, developing the process for screening new and existing employees as well as volunteers and outside contractors who have direct, unsupervised, and uncontrolled access. I mean, do we define what uncontrolled means? Do we, you talked about having badges. Has that been fully identified in here, that that is going to be the plan, process, the procedure? And then things like coaches or whatever, is there any kind of, we have people grouped under different terminology in the policy here, but, or the protocols, but I'm not sure if there's a difference between someone who's being paid, who's being unpaid, who's unpaid, I guess, indicates a volunteer, but then some people are necessarily go kind of beyond what you would think of as a volunteer. So where they fall into some of these.
So we're doing work now. Contractors is a place where we've been working with procurement, and we've been working with facilities management and other offices that have contractors to clearly define the standard, which is the law that's effective July 1st. And in the process of rolling out in all of our solicitations, there'll be language that is clear on this. But we want to train for principals and supervisors about what these categories are and who falls into one bucket. But our expectation is that if you're able to walk around the building by yourself, you should be, and there are kids there, you should be fingerprinted. And if you're going to continue to do that, otherwise you should be supervised as you move through the building.
Okay, and that, so our principals and our staff will all understand that through training, that if they see somebody not tagged properly or something, then that's something that they have a responsibility to.
And we already, in our volunteer policy, we already say, your volunteer policy, we already say that.
Nice try.
Great.
So that volunteers shouldn't be in the building unsupervised as an expectation under that policy. So we will build out on that, but that's been, even before all of this, the idea that staff should be keeping eyes on volunteers in the building, whether they're a parent coming in for one period or a tutor coming in for multiple periods.
So where are we in terms of doing the background checks and the fingerprinting and things like that as of today?
So for staff, one of the recommendations was to expand to CPS checks for all staff. Mm-hmm. That's contingent upon a budget line item that will hopefully be approved by the board tomorrow. For contractors, we're getting ready to roll out on July 1st for contracts existing and going into effect for contracts that fit into this category, and getting up the all the steps. And that's really good work to figure out what the steps are and making sure that we have properly identified the universe of contracts, that we've communicated so that everybody knows about these requirements, that we've consulted with principals to understand any unexpected glitches that go out, and then to also talk with contractors and make sure we also have enough resources within our in our fingerprinting, and if we do need to have backup private vendors, that we have those that are up to our standard of expectation of what fingerprinting should be. So that's the work that we're doing for that to come into place. And then on volunteers, we are identifying and focusing on categories of volunteers which are particularly likely to have unsupervised direct access, and going to work to have expectations in place for the coming year for those categories, balancing, of course, the challenges of wanting not to discourage engagement and involvement, but also respect the safety and protect the safety of our kids.
Have we determined who is going to pay for fingerprint checks for our volunteers?
No, we're still working on that. For the contractors, that's going to be an expectation on the contractor.
And when you mentioned our level of expectation, so let's just say we have a construction contract, for example. is the expectation that they will use our background check system, or that they will use their own, and we are going to hope that it's as good as what we fully expect from them and their subcontractors?
So our proposal is that they will use ours unless, or an approved vendor. So if we will make sure that, and there are a couple already that we've used, for instance, when there was a water damage in OHRD, we needed to use another vendor. So we had experience with another vendor. So that vendor may be one of the vendors that we use as backups. And if a contractor comes to us and says, for instance, a contractor that works with the federal government and the federal government has approved a particular background check, we may be able to work with them to streamline that process for them. But the expectation is that the reports, the criminal background check reports, come to MCPS to review, because the question is whether you're going to assign that particular employee to a contractor working in our building. So we want to be sure that those background checks have been done, not just assure that there is some certification that the contractor did it, but we actually have some sense of who is in our buildings and is badged, if we're going to badge them, because that's what the badge is going to be able to stand for.
Okay, because that's what I was concerned, like even in an emergency situation, how do we know if someone, if we call in our contractor and they call in a subcontractor, how do we know, how does the principal know with any kind of assurance that this person has been properly vetted and approved? And
so this applies to subcontractors. So if they had a badge, they'd be approved. But if not, there would be an expectation that they'd be supervised if they're going to come in at all.
okay.
Okay, so are there any other board member questions or concerns on the policy? Or are we ready to?
I just have one quick question.
Sure.
Is there anything that you would like to comment on about any of the comments that we received from anything you want to pontificate over or share a thought on us with us, so you feel like everything has been, confidently attributed to any changes that at this point should be made or could be made, or is it we're still really looking at? I know it's a continued work in progress, and I appreciate that so much because, like I said, I think we're going to learn as we go along, obviously. This didn't happen, as I said before, this didn't happen in a day. It's not going to be fixed in a day. But is there anything that you want to share with us, having heard from everybody?
It's always dangerous for a lawyer to ask a lawyer to pontificate.
Exactly.
So a couple quick things.
I do this with Suzanne because I appreciate the perspective.
That are important to stress. The public process is always helpful in getting comments.
Mm-hmm.
So when we got this batch of comments, one of the things we wanted to make sure as we went back to the advisory group, we talked them through with staff, we consulted with the police and CPS and the state's attorney's office just to make sure we hadn't missed anything. And in some places, sometimes you know what you're saying, but it can always be clarified. Right. So if you look at the protocols, you'll see, there's a decent number, I don't know, mine came off in blue, so maybe it's red, so it's blue, but a commitment to improve that process. And we went through in a number of places in just a couple of themes. We stressed and made it clearer that we wanted to remind everybody about the law that prohibits unauthorized disclosure of CPS material, that nothing here was going to, or was our intention to go around that, and that would be something we'd be very careful about, because that's key, that we don't want people to even inadvertently have an unauthorized disclosure of a reportable incident. I think that we also wanted to clarify the point that we talked a little bit around before about what's the expectation for collaboration with the police and with CPS in a situation where there has been identified as something in the building that is a cause for concern. There's been a report made, and now we want to make sure that we can move to place that person on administrative leave because it's important without unnecessarily impeding the investigation. So clarifying that piece of it to make sure that we're consistent with our expectations. And then I think on notification of parents was a piece that we spent a decent amount of time on. And this is an important balancing area that, again, there are situations where a conversation with a parent that reveals too much information may inadvertently muck up an investigation and bring somebody to justice. On the other hand, if there's a report in school that's been reported and the kid is coming home that evening and talking to his or her parent or guardian, and there hasn't been some communication by CPS, the police, or by us, that's going to affect long-term the relationships that we have and all of us as county agencies have with the families. So we tried to clean up our expectations around that. We also tried to clarify our expectations around a school official being present during questioning. COMAR is very clear that school officials can be present during those situations, but I think that there's also sensitivity that we might want to have towards who's the school official there, and not inadvertently by having a school official there somehow intimidating a student from being candid with CPS or with the police. So we spelled that out a bit more in the protocols in detail. We looked back at some Attorney General opinions that were identified to us and made sure that we were clear with those, and we also made sure that there was some comfort and continued comfort with the state's attorney's office, with the police, with CPS, that we were doing the right thing here and that these made sense to how they expected the relationship to happen in these very difficult situations.
So that was another one of my points, was that I didn't see anyone necessarily specifically here representing them. Are they good with where we are right now?
I think that they've been involved every step of the way and have continued to be involved. Many of the pieces in here that say the police will do things actually are either reflective of the existing MOU that exists or improvements that we're working on making as part of that. And we are hopeful that partnership will continue and be enhanced. I know that there are many interactions in the cases that are reported, and those are the actual practice is as important as anything we can clarify perfectly on paper.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
They're ready to recommend the policy as amended to come to the full board.
Yep.
All in favor? Okay.
Thanks.
So.
Thank you for all your